Hello world, Lisa Friedrichsen, your friend and computer science professor with another short YouTube. This time we're in the textbook series that also works for older versions of this textbook, and we're in chapter 6. These YouTubes are to emphasize the key issues in the chapter as well as illuminate some of the trickier areas of the chapter. Now this chapter gets into the box model, which is super important to CSS, which is why I have specific YouTubes on those topics. If the box model is foreign to you, or inline versus block content is foreign to you, or div and span, the non-semantic tags are a new concept. Be sure to supplement your knowledge with these 3 YouTubes because all 3 of these issues are central to this chapter and central to CSS. So let's dig right into chapter 6. If you're doing the Pacific Trails Resort project or the other end of chapter project, your final project is going to look something like this. You have the same 3 images on the home page, but the content is now constrained. It doesn't go from one side of the screen to the other. It's centered inside the browser. That's an important concept, as well as many other properties that are added to your style sheet. So at this point in time, if you don't have comments to organize your styles, I highly recommend them. For me, I put the body, the big outer wrapper, header, main, and footer at the top. Then I go into my navigation styles, my headings, lists, and then we, of course, have many class and ID styles that we add in this chapter. On the IDs, if you add them as shown in the book, you end up with a lot of repeating styles. So again, if you want to make a selector that selects the home hero, your hero, and trail hero selectors and move some of these declarations into that combination selector, you can cut down on the size of your style sheet and clarify that these 3 selectors all have the same styles, the same 3 declarations, except for a different image. And that just tidies up your style sheet a bit. Adhere to the concept of dry. Don't repeat yourself. And you also know that when you see that pound sign, some call it the hashtag, we're working against an ID attribute in the HTML. So pound sign home hero on the index page is going to work against this div that has the ID of home hero. We know when we see a period or a dot, we're speaking to a class attribute in the HTML. So dot resort would work against the span class of resort as well as this span class of resort. So we can put many elements with the same class, and the way I think of that is we can have many students in one class period. So we can have many HTML elements in one class period, but everyone has a number, has an ID, is unique. And that's why we have that number sign to represent a unique ID. So while there's such great material in chapter 6, and those hands-on exercises, again, are short, they're easy to do, but they're gold to your learning. I again take issue with how images are inserted on the web page. In this chapter, we're going to take out the image element. Remember in chapter 5, we had an image element here that represented the image, and then we stretched it across the screen. Well, now that entire element has been eliminated in favor of a div that has a background image. Now I ask you, is this a background image or is it content on the page? I would argue that it's content on the page. So it should be coded with an image element, which works better for screen readers, accessibility, and search engine optimization. If that image changed to something that had proportions, those images would be skewed out of proportion because in our style sheet, we're fixing the height and then we're telling the background to stretch to be as tall and as wide as the background is. And that only works when we're stretching something that doesn't have distinguishable proportions, such as these big rocks on the beach. And I'll prove that to you by inserting a different image. You can see that the people are not only shorter and squattier than they normally would be, the image is a little bit pixelated. It's not flexible. And as I widen this screen, you can see that the people are expanding in girth. So I feel this is something you do not want to replicate in your unique projects, even though your instructor may ask you to go ahead and code Pacific Trails or the other end of chapter project exactly as shown. I would not use that div. I would go back and use an image element with the SRC attribute, go back to putting that image in as an actual content on the page. Give it an ID of coastline. I'm going to save and go back to my style sheet, and I would go back and then give that specific element or potentially all of my images a max width of 100%, which we know makes that image flexible. When I save and refresh my page now, I've got a flexible image. Now, if I don't like the fact that it's off to the left because it's really not centered on the page, I can go back in my style sheet and center this. Now, an image is inline content. You can't center it itself, so you'll often find an image inside of a P or inside of a div. So you can put the image inside of a block element and then center the content in that block element. And let's give this an ID of Coast Container. Back to CSS. Coast Container is going to have a text align property of center. And if I save and refresh that, now I've got something that I feel looks good and represents the image in proportion, as well as allowing it to be flexible. The way the exercise is coded works for this image, but does not work for all images. So I wanted to make sure we highlighted that. Another key aspect of this chapter is how to center the entire page inside the viewport. And that is accomplished through this outer div. We now have a div that surrounds everything. It starts right after the body opens and closes right before the body closes. And in the CSS, on that wrapper ID, we set the width to 80% and we give it a margin of auto. Those two rules will then center that content. For whatever reason, the book has you do the CSS before you do the HTML. I highly recommend that you do the HTML steps first so that as you apply the CSS, you can do one declaration, save that declaration, and then look at the impact on the HTML. It's no fun to write a bunch of CSS rules when you cannot see what they're doing on the HTML. I'm a big believer in writing all of your HTML first, having your content ready to go, not worrying about what it looks like, and then applying one rule at a time and saving and refreshing your screen. If you get into trouble, I want to show you right-click, inspect, and you can select any element on the page and look at its styles and play with its styles. It's really a powerful tool. You can select any element by clicking this little arrow and then clicking the element on the web page. So now we have the nav selected. Or you can go over in this top pane on the Elements tab and simply select the element that you want to examine. If we examine the nav, then we're going to see all the styles of the nav down here. And we could delete a style by clicking that checkbox in front of the declaration to temporarily eliminate it, and we can see what's going on. That's much faster than commenting it out in the style sheet. And if I go to the bottom of this bottom pane, I'm even going to see the box model, which is going to show me my padding, my border, and my margin on that block element. So it's extremely helpful if your page does not look like the examples in the book to come in here, select the element that you're having trouble with, and examining those styles that apply to that element, the header in this case, and then to look down at the bottom and see how the box model is working out. You must go slowly and carefully through the chapter. You must understand everything as it's being presented because this material is cumulative. So if you come across a concept or a term that is not making sense to you at that moment, you have to stop and clarify it with your instructor, with the textbook, with my YouTubes, until you're at peace with that concept in your web development journey. Thank you.